Every man has lived this moment. You lock eyes with her, or maybe you don't even need that much. A smile, a walk, a glance across the room, and in an instant, something inside you changes. The world doesn't stop moving, but it feels like it does. Sound fades. Your attention collapses down to a single figure. Nothing else matters. Not the people around you. Not the work waiting on your desk. Not even your own self-awareness. You're caught. Captured. We all call her something different. The dream girl. The crush. The hot chick. But what matters isn't her name. It's the force she awakens in you. A force so strong it can erase years of discipline in a heartbeat. Think about it. A man can spend years carving himself into someone powerful. He can grind through early mornings at the gym, nights spent building his career, hours sharpening his mind. He can stack accomplishment on accomplishment until people look at him with respect. And yet, in a single moment, all of it can feel fragile. One glance from her, and suddenly he's nervous. He doubts himself. His carefully built composure cracks. Why? Why can beauty do what weapons cannot? Why can a single woman have the power to make intelligent men stumble over their words, abandon their plans, or even betray themselves? The easy answer is lust, biology, reproduction. But that answer is too small. If it were just about sex, it would pass as quickly as hunger or thirst. Men wouldn't lose their empires, their legacies, their very sanity over something so simple. No, the force that beauty awakens in men is heavier, stranger. It feels like destiny. It carries with it the illusion of completion, as if within her presence lies the missing piece of a man's soul. This is why men don't just admire women, they worship them. They write songs about women they barely know. They fight wars over them. They risk fortunes and reputations for a kiss, a glance, a chance to be chosen. Because she doesn't appear as just another person. She appears as salvation. History echoes with these stories. Antony gave up an empire for Cleopatra. Paris doomed an entire city for Helen. Samson, blinded not by his enemies, but by the woman he trusted. Men who had power beyond measure, yet handed it away at the feet of beauty. And nothing has changed. The setting is different, but the pattern is the same. Instead of royal courts, men now kneel in digital arenas. Scroll through social media, and you'll see millions caught in orbit around the same archetype. The hot chick. Each one believing that her validation means something. That in her attention lies his worth. This is the beginning of the trap. Because the moment you believe she carries the missing piece of your identity, you stop seeing her as she is. She becomes something larger, almost sacred. You project perfection onto her. You make her into a goddess. And when she becomes a goddess, you become her worshipper. That is how men fall into chains. A prison built not from stone or iron, but from desire. But why? Why do men make this exchange so willingly? Why do we keep repeating the same mistakes, generation after generation, empire after empire? One of the greatest minds of the 20th century wrestled with this very question. He spent his life studying the inner architecture of the human psyche. He believed that most people are not ruled by logic, but by symbols, ancient, unconscious forces that guide our desires without us even realizing it. And among these forces, none is more dangerous for a man than the figure of the woman. Jung called it the Anima, not a literal woman, but the image of woman that lives inside every man's unconscious, a kind of inner mirror of the feminine, carrying all of a man's longings, fantasies, and emotional needs. Jung wrote, "Every man carries within him the eternal image of woman, not the image of this or that particular woman, but a definitive feminine image. In other words, when a man looks at a woman he finds captivating, he isn't simply seeing her. He's seeing the reflection of something already inside him, his own anima. This is where the danger begins. Because once he projects that inner image onto her, she is no longer just a person in his eyes. She becomes divine. She becomes the missing piece of his soul. He believes she can complete him. And this is exactly what Jung warned about. When a man identifies too strongly with the anima, he loses himself. That's why history is filled with men who seem to fall under a spell. It wasn't the woman herself. It was their own anima projected onto her, magnifying her presence into something irresistible. The man feels as if fate itself is pulling him toward her, when in reality, he's being pulled by his own unconscious desires. And women, consciously or not, can use this. Some exploit it deliberately, recognizing that the attention of men is not about who they are, but about the fantasies men project onto them. Others do it unconsciously, simply enjoying the control that flows into their hands when men orbit them. Jung saw this dynamic as a spiritual crisis for men, because the more a man loses himself in his projection, the weaker he becomes. He is no longer acting from strength, from purpose, from clarity. He is acting from need, and need is the fastest way to be controlled. Machiavelli, centuries before Jung, hinted at the same principle from a political angle. He who controls desire, controls power. A man ruled by his longing is a man already conquered. But here's the catch. The anima itself is not evil. Jung didn't say to destroy it. He said the anima has to be integrated. A man must recognize this inner image for what it is, instead of letting it dominate him. Otherwise, the anima doesn't make him whole. It makes him weak. And weakness is the fertile ground where manipulation takes root. So the question remains, what does this trap look like in real life? How does a woman, knowingly or not, take advantage of the anima projection to rule over a man's choices? That's where we turn next, into the step-by-step mechanics of the psychological prison. Step 1. Projection. It begins the moment he projects his anima onto her. He sees not her humanity, but his fantasy reflected back at him. In that instant, his perception is distorted. He fills in the gaps with imagination, with idealization. She doesn't need to prove anything. His mind does the work for her. This is why men often fall hardest for women they barely know. He doesn't need to know her. His anima supplies the details. He believes she's kind, pure, loyal, or perhaps wild and adventurous, whatever his inner world longs for. She wears a mask he himself has painted. Step 2. Dependence. Once he crowns her as the key to his completion, he begins to depend on her reactions for validation. Her smile feels like a blessing. Her silence feels like punishment. He starts organizing his actions, his words, his decisions around how she might respond. The tragedy is that the man often calls this love. But it's not love, it's dependency. He no longer stands firmly in his own identity. He waits for her to reflect it back to him. Step 3. Blindness. With dependence comes blindness. He begins to overlook things he would never tolerate otherwise. Disrespect, emotional manipulation, even betrayal. He explains it away. He tells himself stories to protect the image he's invested in. She didn't mean it. She's just confused. She'll change. He's not blind to the world, only to her flaws. His anima makes her untouchable. Step 4. Submission. Finally, the man gives up his will. Sometimes this looks dramatic, selling everything to chase her across the world, betraying his family, abandoning his purpose. But more often it's subtle. He stops leading his own life. his energy is redirected into keeping her close, keeping her happy, keeping the illusion alive. And here's the cruel twist. Many women don't even realize what's happening. They don't see the inner fantasy he's projecting. They only feel the power flowing into their hands. Some use it deliberately, dangling attention, withholding affection, rewarding compliance. Others simply bask in it, unaware of how completely they've ensnared him. Jung saw this cycle as one of the greatest dangers for men. Because once a man loses himself in his anima, he stops living authentically. He lives as an extension of the woman he's enthroned. He has traded freedom for fantasy. Machiavelli would call this the ultimate form of conquest, not ruling through armies or fear, but through desire. For the man, it feels like devotion. For the woman, it feels like influence. But in truth, it is slavery, a slavery built on longing. This is the psychological trap. Projection, dependence, blindness, submission, the four walls of an invisible prison. A prison countless men enter willingly, even proudly, convinced that they've found love. But here's the question Jung pressed against every man. Can you break free? Is there a way to reclaim the power you hand over when you bow to your anima? That is where we turn next, into the path Jung believed could shatter the illusion and give a man back his strength. There comes a point in every man's life when he has to decide whether he will live awake or asleep. And nowhere is this decision more costly than in the way he relates to women. Because if you go through life asleep, controlled by your unchecked desire, then you will always be at the mercy of women who understand that weakness better than you do. Carl Jung's warning wasn't just about women. It was about you. About what happens when you give away the steering wheel of your psyche without even realizing it. Because when a woman learns that your desire rules you, she doesn't have to dominate you with force. She only has to stand still, smile, and let your hunger do the work. You'll convince yourself she's the answer. You'll justify every red flag. You'll write her excuses before she even speaks. Think of the countless men throughout history, destroyed not by their enemies, but by the women they couldn't resist. Kings who gave up empires, warriors who lost their edge, thinkers who bent their brilliance into chains. This pattern repeats because men believe desire is strength, when in reality, it is the rope you hand over willingly, begging to be tied. Jung's insight points us to a truth few want to hear. When you feel consumed by attraction, when a woman seems almost magical in the way she stirs your soul, that is precisely the moment to slow down. Because what feels like destiny might simply be a shadow from within. What feels like love at first sight might be your own anima, reflected back at you, demanding recognition. And if you don't see it for what it is, you'll suffer brutally. Many women know this, maybe not in Jungian terms, maybe not consciously, but instinctively. They see how men light up under beauty, how attention bends their will, how lust blurs their judgment. And the smart ones, the dangerous ones, learn to use it, not just to capture attention, but to control, to test, to dominate silently without ever lifting their voice. That is the woman Jung warned about. Not a demon, not a villain, but the mirror of your own unclaimed desire. If you don't master yourself, she will master you. This doesn't mean you must run from women, or suppress attraction, or live bitter and guarded. Jung didn't preach fair. He preached integration. He believed that your projections, the parts of yourself you cast outward, are your greatest teachers. The woman who controls your desire is showing you the chains you never admitted you had. She's forcing you to confront what's still hidden inside. So the path isn't escape. The path is recognition. To step back, to see clearly, to name what is yours and what is hers. To strip away the projection and meet her as a human being, not as your savior. When you can do that, when you can feel desire without being enslaved by it, then her power dissolves. Because the truth is, no woman can control you if you are not blind to yourself. And that is the cost of blindness, to live under the illusion that your hunger is love, that your fantasy is truth. But the reward of awakening is freedom, the freedom to see women clearly, to choose without desperation, to stand with desire in your chest, but not in your chains. That is the strength Jung pointed us toward.